Dr. David Burkus is a fellow Oklahoman, and I really have enjoyed learning about him over the years. And we've never gotten to work together. We've been in the same room sometimes and have never gotten to work together. And I really wanted you to meet him. He's an organizational psychologist who's written several books. His latest book is called Best Team Ever: The Surprising Science of High-Performing Teams. And we had a great conversation. I know you're really going to love Dr. Burkus. Get ready to meet the mindful leader, Dr. David Burkus. As one of the world's leading business thinkers, Dr. David Burkus's forward-thinking ideas and best-selling books are helping leaders build their best team ever. He is the best-selling author of 4 books about business and leadership. His books have won multiple awards and have been translated into dozens of languages. I assume you didn't do that yourself. Since 2017, Dr. Burkus has been ranked multiple times as one of the world's top business thought leaders. His insights on leadership and teamwork have been featured in all kinds of magazines, newspapers, TV, all of those things. Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, CNN, the BBC, NPR, and so much more. He's a former business school professor. Dr. Burkus now works with leaders from organizations across all kinds of industries, including Pepsi, Fidelity, Adobe, NASA, and more. So he's literally been to the moon and back. Dr. Burkus, thank you so much for joining us. I've been looking forward to our talk.
Oh, thank you. I don't know that I've been to the moon, but I've certainly, I don't know, maybe helping us get back there. I don't know, but yeah, I got an email one day from a colleague of mine from my doctoral program who went to work for NASA. And she was like, hey, federal government still has everyone working remotely, but everybody keeps telling me to grab a copy of your book. I was like, hey, that's awesome. And then that turned into 2 or 3 workshops and that sort of thing. It was crazy cool. My son's a big space nerd. So I had to throw it in the bio literally just for him.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, it's a big deal working with NASA. So that's fun. Tell us, let's everybody, you and I, a lot of the people, I just started 4 different sentences right there. A lot of the people I have on the show, I've met either through different work or at other conferences, kinds of things. You and I have never met. We were just talking about it a minute ago. We're both from Oklahoma, but we kind of like go off in different directions. But for people who don't know you, that aren't familiar with you, kind of tell us a little bit about you, about your background, how you got to where you are now.
Yeah. So I am Philadelphia born, Okie, not even Okie raised. I like to joke I got here as quick as I can, but that was like 19 years old. But I often like to say I'm a Philadelphian by birth and an Okie by choice. So that may factor into some of it. I'm an organizational psychologist by training. So I study teamwork, team culture, motivation. I'm really trying to figure out how to make work not suck. That's the core of what we do, right? Or as I like to joke, we're the token psychologists in every business school because spreadsheets only tell you where the problem is. But once you figure out where the problem is, guarantee you the problem is a person. And so that's what we study, right? It's how do you fix those sort of people problems. But I don't know how to say this right. I wasn't a very good academic, right? Because I had very little research, little interest in doing the type of research that you have to do to sort of make tenure and what have you. So I was doing it for a long time, finished the doctorate, got on tenure track, got promoted once or twice, but then for a variety of different reasons, the work that I was writing for practitioners was spreading way more than the inside academic work. And so eventually I kind of voluntarily stepped off that track and have just been for the transition started in 2016, finished around 2020. So let's say for the last 3 years, full time, have just been focused on working with senior leadership teams, working with leaders across organizations, and sometimes with the whole organization on the culture of their team, whether that's in-person, hybrid, remote, and the connections between that culture and performance. And so it's been a lot of fun. Most of the stuff is still evidence-based because I'm an organizational psychologist by heart. Right. But I'm a storyteller by trade because those things tend to resonate with people far more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're doing great work, and I'm really excited to talk to you about your latest book, Best Team Ever: The Surprising Science of High Performing Teams. It's a really good read. We encourage everybody to go check this out. There's some really good stuff in it. But tell us, why did you write this book? Why this book in particular?
Yeah, so it's a bit less why and a bit more why now, right? If you think about it. So
Okay.
the through line through all of my work has been teams.
Right.
My first book 10 years ago was Myths of Creativity, and the most highlighted line in that entire book is creativity is a team sport. It's not the domain of lone geniuses. It's always been a team and collaboration sport. And everything else, all of the other books have had that sort of team and the fact that we don't do this alone component, right? Now, what happened was this came to a head in 2020 with the pandemic, and a lot of my prior work had been looking at the future of work and the future of teams and collaboration. And so, obviously, from 2015 on, I was studying and working with remote organizations. And then when 40% of the workforce and what felt like 100% of the workforce suddenly went to work remotely, that's where everyone was asking for help all at once. And so spent most of the pandemic. That became a book called Leading from Anywhere. That became a series of talks and trainings around this kind of remote and hybrid leadership. But what ended up happening is the world kind of started to put stuff back together is two realizations. One is we needed sort of location agnostic solutions, right? So it's one thing to talk about how to do management by walking around. That's great, but that requires an office. It's one thing to talk about how to lead remotely and run remote huddles and asynchronous work and what have you, but that's for remote. And what a lot of the leaders were like was like, I don't know what type of situation I'm going to be leading in by the end of this year. So what just works all of the time, right? And really the only thing that, if you look at it, kind of works all of the time is focusing in on that team culture, the habits, the norms of behaviors of the team. Now, the other big realization that I had during the pandemic is, and I think this was actually true before the pandemic, I just didn't see it, was that for most people, your experience of work, the biggest effect on your engagement, the biggest effect on your performance, and even if I just asked you, do you like working for your company? Most people aren't actually thinking about the whole company. They're thinking about the team or the teams that they're working on. And so that was the reason for, that's sort of the why now, right? Is I felt like we needed a post-pandemic deep dive into what makes for a high-performing team culture and how can you build one no matter what situation you're in. And so that's what we sought to do with Best Team Ever.
Yeah, really good. That's great. So we're going to kind of go chapter by chapter and dive into these, but you kind of have, I don't know if you call it a model or what you call it, but your triangle of the 3 points. So tell us about that model first, and then we'll dive deep into those.
Yeah. So the three elements of a Best Team Ever culture, right? Or it's a triangle because there's three. And when I'm feeling particularly like goofy, one of my sons is a big Zelda nerd. And so sometimes we call it the Triforce of team culture,
Right.
Which if you have no idea about the game Zelda, that whole thing just sold over your head. But sometimes we call it that. Essentially, when you look at all of the different research around teamwork, team culture, collaboration, I mean, there are lists upon lists in the world of organizational psychology. We've got 30 to 40 years worth of great research on team culture and all these different lists. And my goal wasn't to just go, here's a comprehensive guide. My goal was to go, okay, where's there enough overlap between all of these lists that I can confidently say this will never be disproven, right? Or very, very likely it'll be disproven. In science, we never say something will never be disproven, but that's a whole other monologue. And so when you look at all of that, all of trying to reconcile all of those lists and find commonalities, we kind of arrived at three: a common understanding, psychological safety, and then what I call pro-social purpose, which is a combination of sort of normal mission, vision, value stuff, but also a direct connection to who benefits from it, seeing that sort of pro-social impact. So the three kind of came from an attempt. I mean, if you look at Project Aristotle's a famous one, they have 5. There are other research studies before that have 4, but moderated by 2 other elements. And there's all of these different models. And candidly, I also tend to think anything more than 3 or 4 is too hard to remember. I mean, it's too hard for me to remember. So obviously, if you're a busy manager trying to figure out what are the 3 things I can do to make my team better, I can't give you 17, right? I got to give you the number you can remember.
Right. Yeah. Good. All right. Well, let's dive into these. So the first one is common understanding. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so common understanding, or sometimes called shared understanding, but really sort of a combination of a couple different research bodies, is how well team members have a commonly held perspective on the team's expertise, tasks, roles, and responsibilities, but also the individual team members' strengths and weaknesses, context, preferences. So I like to say it's sort of clarity of task and role, and also clarity of people, or what I sometimes call empathy. So we have this combination of not only clarity, but also empathy. I know it's expected of me, and I know how that's going to fit into the team's work, but I also know how my team members work. And, if you think about, let's just talk about the last couple of years during the pandemic and trying to work remotely. If you think about it, the first problems when we all just suddenly packed up our stuff or didn't and left our sandwich rotting at the office, right? It was role clarity problems. It was making sure everybody knew what was expected of them, had the tools to do that, and what have you. But as it dragged on, it became very much empathy problems. It became very much different people working in different contexts. I'm in a about a 10-foot by 10-foot room. It's in the basement of my house. My kids are in school. I have a hardwired internet connection. Working from home is awesome for me. Other people, their experience of working from home was like, I'm hiding behind a folding screen that I set up in my dining room where I'm hiding from my kids who are Zoom schooling, and I hate this, right? So the context people were in mattered. But then there's also the preferences. Some people love hashing things out on the phone or on Zoom, have no problem being on camera. Other people never want to turn their cameras on and would much rather write you a lengthy email where they think through everything logically. And if you don't know those different preferences and contexts of your team, you don't truly know how to communicate with them best or how to collaborate with them best. So you just make a bunch of assumptions about how they're supposed to be working. And then you get frustrated when they violate those assumptions about them you never told them you had, which is a recipe for all sorts of friction and disaster.
Yeah. One of the things I thought was interesting is you talked about how common understanding raises the intelligence level of the whole team. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the phenomenon here is often referred to as collective intelligence. It's a whole series of research by Anita Williams-Woolley, and to her credit, a lot of other collaborators on her team. And the idea here was essentially you have teams that achieve collective intelligence and teams that don't. So you have some teams, you put them in a scenario, in a performance scenario, we're asking a team to do a bunch of different tasks, and most teams actually fail to meet the potential of the team, either by, if you want to look at the averages of everybody's IQ and then give the team a collective intelligence test, a lot of times they score lower than the average of everyone's IQ. Or if you give them a creative thinking test and you have particular people who score really, really highly on prior tests of individual creative thinking, the team still scores lower, right? So you're not getting that, I don't know, Stephen Covey might call it synergy. Right. Sure. And then other teams, you're getting that. You're getting the average group intelligence is higher than the actual numerical average of everyone individually. You're getting teams that no matter what type of task we throw at them, they're performing well. And there's a couple commonalities in all those teams that achieve collective intelligence, right? One is what Anita Williams-Woolley called social sensitivity, how well I can read the emotions and the potential feelings behind people's actions. Right. So it's not just that I hear your words, but I kind of understand where you're coming from too. Like I use the word empathy in place of social sensitivity, but kind of that same thing. Can I see what you're feeling? Maybe not feel what you're feeling, but at least observe it. Right. The other thing we see is that a lot of these teams that achieve collective intelligence make a point to take turns sharing. Right. They make a point to make sure every person has had a voice, a chance to speak to an issue, which is another great way to build that sense of empathy. My favorite correlation in every collective intelligence study, by the way, is actually the easiest, which is the more women on the team, the better the team performed. Like pure and simple. It's actually the strongest correlation in any of our research. Now, the theory behind that is that in aggregate, women tend to score higher on average in social sensitivity than men do, right? So the explanation might be social sensitivity, but I mean, one quick hack for improving the culture of your team: hire more women.
Right. Yeah, I love it. So let's drill down a little bit further. You've mentioned some things that I had in my notes already, but let's drill down. So you talk about how on this point of clarifying understanding, common understanding is made up really of clarity and empathy, as you've mentioned. So let's talk about clarity a little bit more. You give the story in the book about Pal's Sudden Service, which is an interesting name of it's a burger joint. Is that right?
It is a mostly drive-through burger joint in kind of Southern Appalachia area of the United States. It's interesting. There's only about 30 or 40 locations. It's entirely privately held. But it's also the only fast food chain that has ever won the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award. It has the highest per square footage, like revenue per square foot of any fast food restaurant, and the lowest error rate of any fast food restaurant. My favorite stat is they measure their success based on what they call wheels stop to wheels go. In other words, when you stop to make an order and when you go to drive off of their property. On average, you get your order in 19 seconds. 19 seconds is faster than it takes to sing happy birthday to you at a party, right? So that's fast, right? And that's where the name comes from too. The Pal Barger, the founder, was like, well, we're not fast food. What's faster than fast? Well, what if your food was sudden? You order it and boom, it's there, it's ready. That's what we are. We're sudden service. And the reason they're so successful in this capacity is that they're so committed to clarity. Everybody knows exactly what's expected of them and they've been trained on it. So new hires, before you go to work in one of the restaurants, you have 80 hours of training on how to operate in your role or roles, really, because you're trained on multiple stations inside the restaurant. You don't actually know what station you're going to be on until you show up for work that day, which I think is a kind of a fun way that novelty works. You also you look at every day, you look at who's working that shift, and the leader of the team for that shift looks at strengths and weaknesses. You know, if you want to connection to common understanding, right? Strengths and weaknesses, roles, what have, and formulates the team based on who they have in the moment, right? And so you might be working on a variety of different stuff, but you get all of that training. You continue to be, it's not just one and done too. You're continuously poured into. There's a rule that leaders at all levels, including the CEO, have to spend 10% of their time training people underneath them. If you're actually in the restaurants, you get these little things. They call them calibrations. They're really pop quizzes. So you start your shift.
This was one of my favorite parts. I'm glad you bring this up because the recalibration. This was one of my favorite parts.
Yeah. So first of all, like I actually, when I first was doing all of this research and I heard the term calibration, I actually thought like, oh, that's kind of a nasty term, right? Like humans or machines or what have you. But it's not calibration on you, it's on them, right? So it's also not a pop quiz the way we give to students or whatever, because that again is a test of your knowledge. It's really a way to measure their training, right? So you start your shift, and if you're randomly selected to get one of these calibrations, you're given an exam, right? A quick question, little stuff. How many squirts of ketchup go on this burger in this order? What order do you do this and all that sort of stuff? And what I get a kick out of is that cheating is encouraged, right?
That's awesome.
In other words, you get this test and you have until the end of your shift to submit it. And if you don't know the answer or you're not sure of the answer, go talk to anybody else you're working with in that shift, because we're all here to help you, right? And it's really, again, it's a statement not on how well you remember the stuff, but how well we've trained you on it. And if too many people are getting the wrong answers, they use that to examine the training and what we need to change on that. And you would think that this level of training, this level of specificity would, like I said, calibration would make people feel like a cog in a machine, but actually the engagement rates are higher. The turnover rates are lower. Why? Because people, when you look at all of the research on engagement and motivation, right? People like doing a task that is just inside their capabilities, that stretches them a little bit, but that they're adequately prepared for. And a lot of times where a lot of fast food might get boring and what have you is when you're either over prepared because the job is so simple, right? Or underprepared because you haven't been trained adequately. And PALS really hits that clarity right in the moment with, you don't know what you're going to do when you get here, and we're going to stretch you. We're going to give you calibration. We're going to push for, little rewards. We have all of these things to reward you for doing things right, et cetera. But we're also going to make sure you have every tool you need, and so do all of your coworkers, so you can expect the same level of high performance from them.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite stories in the whole book, and it really made me want to go visit one of those stores. I thought that would be really great.
Go get a sauce burger with Frenchy fries, not French fries, Frenchy fries. Go get one of those. Yeah,
Frenchy fries. All right, I'll have to check that out. So one of my favorite parts of the book is at the end of each of these chapters, you have I call it like a how-to section, like some things to help people level up in that section. So maybe what are some of your favorite on clarity? What would be some of your favorite how-tos on?
Yeah, well, man, we could go all day here. I think my single biggest one for most people listening to do is I'm a huge fan of what I call huddles. This is a term I stole from the world of agile software development. In agile, they call it a scrum. Scrum is a rugby term. I have no idea how that sport works. I've tried. I had dinner with a world-class rugby referee one time. He's still like, I didn't get it. But I understand American rules football, and a huddle is that syncing up of action before the play, which is what a huddle is supposed to be.
Right.
Ideally, you get your team together on a regular basis. At a place like Pals, it's the start of every shift. If you look at really high performing teams in airline industries, for example, there's a huddle before every flight, right? If you're thinking about your average knowledge work team, probably not that, but once a week is a good rhythm, maybe every few days, whatever rhythm works for you. I would not stretch it past like 2 weeks, but once a week is usually a good rhythm most knowledge teams work. And this is not the all hands meeting where you're reporting all the different announcements and giving them all sorts of information. The idea behind this is a quick stand-up meeting where people answer 3 simple questions. What did I just complete? Meaning between the last time we met and now, what have I done? What am I focused on next? Meaning between now and the next time we meet, what am I committing to? And then what's blocking my progress? And I think the real genius is that final question. Right? We have a problem asking for help a lot of times. We have a problem. We commit to certain things. We get them assigned to us and we're like, okay, cool, no problem. And then when we realize we're in over our head, we spend way too much time trying to figure it out before we start to ask for help. But remember, pals, right? Cheating is encouraged. And so I love this idea that at least once a week, we're giving people a chance to go, here's everything I'm committed to, and here's what I feel worried about because I don't know that I've got the resources or capacity or knowledge or whatever, so I need some help on it. I love that idea. So truthfully, that not only builds clarity because everybody is on the same page at the start of every week, it also kind of builds empathy because you start to get a sense of where people are strong, where they can provide help, what a request for help looks like, et cetera. So I'm a huge fan of huddles.
Yeah, love it. So talking about empathy, that's the second part of this equation. I love your line from The Godfather where he says it's not personal, it's just business. And that doesn't really work with empathy.
Yeah, no, sorry. The Godfather was wrong. It's a great movie. Great series of movie. Well, the first and the third one are great. But it was wrong. There's no such thing as it's not personal, it's just business. Business is personal. Right. And when you look at, there's another line in the book that I love. When you look at high performing teams, what you realize is that they are playing chess, not checkers.
Yeah.
Right. In checkers, all of the pieces on the board move the exact same way. They all move slants. They all move forward. They're all stuck in the same square that they're stuck in. If you manage to get one to the end of the board, all you get to do is move backwards. You still don't get free reign. Right. Whereas in chess, all of the different types of pieces have different movements, have different ways that they can operate. And that's harder at first. It's harder to comprehend at first because you have all of these different personalities, all of these different working preferences, et cetera. But it creates a world of possibilities that is far bigger and far better than just in playing checkers. And so great teams kind of realize that we don't need to force everyone to be the same. In fact, it's better if we're not. But what we need to do is understand all of those things. How do these pieces like to move? What are their strengths, their weaknesses, their preferences, et cetera? And all of that, the catch-all term I use for all of that is that sense of empathy.
Yeah. You also talk about how it takes time to develop empathy. This is something I've tried to really teach people for years, that it doesn't just happen. It takes work, effort, and time to develop that.
Yeah, no, it'd be great if we could give somebody, some, off the shelf, usually not actually very scientifically rigorous personality test. And then everybody knows what color everyone else is and our problems are solved. Right. And there's something to that idea of facilitating a discussion about our differences, but that doesn't really go that far, partly because we don't translate them into action. Right. We don't go, okay, now that we know each other's strengths and weaknesses, how are we going to operate differently? What norms of behavior are we going to commit to collectively based on this knowledge? And we don't do that. And truthfully, even when we do, it takes time because whenever we start it, we're not in the midst of every scenario we're ever going to face. Right. It takes some time to get into every different scenario and think about every different thing. And so you're going to need that time to build that sense of empathy. Yeah,
love it. So tell us maybe some of your favorite how-tos on developing empathy.
Yeah, well, I know I just said it takes time, but I'll give you a kickoff one. And then again, it'll still take time. Probably my favorite activity here is what in the book we call it teammate manuals. Now I've started calling them manuals of me, partly because if you Google that, you find a lot more great resources out there than teammate manual, including websites and apps and all sorts of stuff. But the idea here is to actually create sort of a user's guide to working with you. And you can go really in depth on this guide, or you can go really, really simplistic. It doesn't really matter because the point is actually the conversation that creating the document has, right? So what I do with a lot of teams is I'll just have them answer 4 questions. I'm at my best when blank, right? These are all fill in the blank questions. I'm at my worst when blank. You can count on me to blank, meaning I'm never going to drop the ball here. I'm a high performer in this area, right? I do great. These are my skills. And then what I need from you is blank. In other words, these are the areas I'm unsure, I'm unsteady, or what have you. And I find just giving people time to create that, to think about their past experiences and kind of create that document and then share it out and then allow the team to discuss those differences kickstarts that process of building empathy a lot better than any other. I mean, it's truthfully, I think these work better. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this with a lot of HR people, but I think these work far better than a personality test because they're action oriented, because they're about because they're behavior differences, not necessarily like you don't need to know that Sarah is a blue or a D or whatever. You need to know why Sarah's emails are so long. Right. Or why they're so short or whatever it is. Right. And so these kind of manuals of me facilitate that discussion. And then when the discussion's over, right, you collect all of them, you put them in a place where they're easily referenced so that if 2 or 3 months down the road, I'm trying to figure out, why does David act this certain way? I at least have somewhere I can go to kind of look and get a little, oh yeah, that's right. He mentioned he's a raging introvert. And so no wonder he's probably just burnt out from being on Zoom for 14 days in a row. All right, I'll just give him some space and let him get back to me when he can, right? Little things like that can go a long way towards building empathy.
Yeah, I love the manuals of me idea. I think that's a great idea. All right, one of the things we do on this show, speaking of manuals of me and getting to know you better, is we like to learn about the music that you like. Now, this may not help us work together any better, but I just love music. I feel like we learn more about you when we learn what kind of music you like. So tell us a little bit about the music that you enjoy, maybe some of your favorite songs or artists, albums, concerts. Just tell us a little bit about some of the music you enjoy.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So growing up, if you would have asked me growing up my favorite band, I would have told you U2. But they're really not my favorite band anymore. Because consistently, like if you go to my iTunes and you were to rank what songs I listen to the most, almost all of them are probably by Switchfoot. I really love the band Switchfoot.
Right.
In fact, this is probably more personal than we need to get. Hello Hurricane, which is my favorite album of theirs. And there are songs on that album that I attribute like with each of my children. Like there's a moment in whether it's like just a shared memory or a traumatic, like for each of those songs, I can think of a moment that we shared. And so I listen to that album and I think about all of those sort of past moments, which is kind of cool. And I have 2 boys, and honestly, living with them feels like living in a hurricane. So it's probably a fitting song title too. So yeah, that would be.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. That would be probably my favorite band. My favorite concert I've ever been to was in Oklahoma City. I went to a pre-tour concert for this really esoteric band called Mute Math, and it was in a music hall that's probably 75 people. And so they couldn't do their normal electrics and pyrotechnics and what have you. So what they actually did was they came in from the back of the room. So we're all staring at the stage, and all of a sudden we hear these drums, and the drummer had bought like a marching band drummer kit, and they did like a processional through the crowd to get to the actual stage. And that little moment, we ended up all feeling far more. Also it helped that it was only 75 people in a room that probably only fit 60. But we just most connected I've ever felt to a band playing.
Yeah, that's awesome. 75-person show for Mute Math. That's pretty special.
No, it was pretty cool.
Yeah. That's awesome. Great. Any other favorite bands that you really love?
No, I'll tell you, there's probably others that I could say I really, really love. I think probably in terms of music, one of the coolest experiences I've ever had happen actually happened a couple months ago. I was in an event in Nashville, and Marshall Goldsmith, the executive coach, was putting on the event, and he rented the Bluebird Cafe. And if you know anything about country music, I'm not a country music fan, but he rented the Bluebird Cafe, and then he hired 3 songwriters to play for like 2 hours. And all they did was tell the stories behind every, because they wrote the popular song from Garth Brooks or from Shania Twain or whatever. And it was really just kind of cool to hear that story. Because again, think about my work. what they were really describing was how many people go into every song that you think is from your favorite singer singular, right? And in reality, there's a whole host of people that made that happen, usually even before that notable country music star decides to claim that song or put what they call a
Right.
hold on that song, right? So
Yeah.
again, my work is around teams, and I think that it's
Yeah.
pretty much impossible to make a dent in the universe anymore without doing it through a team. And so it was really cool to hear that through this kind of historic place as well. So yeah.
That's great. And if anybody is interested, there's so much history on Bluebird Cafe. It's legendary. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Junky, really junky place. It's like in a strip mall,
Right.
but man, it's legendary. Yeah, which is kind of the way it is, right? All of the legendary places
Right.
also are like,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah. I just saw a thing the other day where Leanne Rhymes just showed up there, a big surprise to everybody, because it was one of the first places she went when she went to Nashville, just to watch, because it's legendary. And then now she went back to just kind of show back up. She
Oh,
played some
that's
songs
awesome.
and stuff.
That's
Yeah, it was
awesome.
really
I
cool.
love it. Love it.
All right, let's talk about psychological safety. So this is your another leg on the triangle, and this is made of trust and respect. So we'll dig into those, but kind of tell us again what psychological safety is.
Yeah, and this is probably the term most folks listening are already familiar with. Thankfully, we're this has sort of reached its critical mass, right? But Amy Edmondson's been working to create amazing research and push this concept for like 30 years, and there is very little research in modern times around high performing teams that doesn't include this element, right? Quite simply, psychological safety happens in a team when people feel the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. And that's a complicated word, but think about it. Risk taking is, and anytime I speak up because I disagree, I'm taking a risk. Anytime I share my crazy idea that's out of the box and not inside the norms of the team, I'm taking a risk. Anytime I share a failure with a team, I'm taking a risk, right? All of these are forms of interpersonal risk, but they're all forms of interpersonal risk a team needs to find new solutions or to learn from past mistakes and get better. You really can't have a collective, what we might call collective growth mindset without a sense of psychological safety. And the other thing I think is really interesting is a lot of her later research, Edmondson's later research, suggested that as much as we say diversity is our strength, it's not actually true, because diversity without psychological safety is anarchy. Teams that are diverse but don't have a sense of psychological safety perform worse than homogenous teams. But
I thought that was really fascinating, that it can be diversity can be a liability rather than an asset when you don't have psychological safety.
Now, to be fair, when you have psychological safety, it's a huge asset, and those teams do outperform homogenous teams. But it's sort of the moderating effect if we use nerdy organizational psychology terms. And so, you know, it's 2023 as they're recording this. I don't think I need to convince pretty much any leader that they need diversity on their teams. What still I find myself having to convince a lot of leaders is that does mean we need to hold space for all of the differing opinions and differing ideas that come with that diversity. And a lot of people are still uncomfortable there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that's the critical element to diversity, is the psychological safety that allows for diversity. So I love that. All right, so trust is one of those components that makes up psychological safety.
Yeah. So Edmondson kind of put this in her definition that psychological safety is a climate of mutual trust and respect. And I think it's important to emphasize that those are two different things, even though they seem like they are. And the same. And most of the time when we talk about psychological safety, we use the word trust interchangeably. And that's fine. But as when we talk about respect, you'll see it's far more than that. You know, trust refers to how well I feel that I can actually speak my mind and share this thing with you and not be taken advantage of. Right. And trust is kind of the beginning of the process of building psychological safety. If I trust you, then I'll actually share that idea. Now, how you respond is the respect piece and determines whether or not I'll continue to trust you. So automatically we see this little cycle. It's a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle, depending on how the team acts. But I still need that moment of stepping out in trust. And what we know from the research on trust, it's really kind of interesting. Trust isn't given, trust isn't earned, despite those famous maxims. Trust is reciprocated. Trust begets trust, right? When we can see this in the neurochemical research around the hormone oxytocin, when someone is vulnerable with us, or when they speak up because they disagree, when they do this moment where they're stepping out in trust, a decently functioning team will feel trusted as a result. You recognize, your team will recognize when you get vulnerable with them that you're doing that because you trust them. And they're much more likely to respond with trustworthy behavior in kind. So again, vicious cycle or virtuous cycle, depending on that response. And so trust is great, but trust is insufficient. We need to be building trust, but we also need to be talking about that respect piece as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So right before we get to respect, what are some of your favorite ways of building trust?
So, I already hinted at this in that vulnerability piece, but if you're listening to this and you're in a leadership role, like that's it. That's number one. And not deal breaking levels of vulnerability, right? You don't need to like come in on your first day as right. You don't need to overshare. No, you don't need TMI. You don't need to come in your first day of the leader and be like, I feel like my parents never loved me. We're not talking about that, right? But for sometimes just admitting you don't know something. There's so much power in a phrase like, I don't know. What do you think? Right. Or admitting what your weaknesses are, right? And where you struggle to do the work that you're being asked to do with your team, all of those little vulnerabilities, and start as small as you need to, by the way, because this is a reciprocal process. So if you're not comfortable even admitting your weaknesses, like where are you comfortable? Start there. And then just give it time to let that process. And eventually your team will be more vulnerable with you and you'll be more vulnerable with them and kind and boom, boom, boom. And eventually we might even get to the place where you tell them your parents never loved you. Probably not. Right. Probably not. Probably still too much information, but you're not going to get there from day one. So start wherever you're comfortable. But because trust begets trust, if you're in a leadership role, this is really easy. You go first.
Right. Yeah. Love that. Great advice. So that leads us then to respect, which goes along with trust. And the point you make in the book is that without respect, trust dissipates.
Yeah, exactly. So how you respond, right? So trust happens when I'm acting out in trust when I share my actual perspective, when I share my idea, when I admit my failure, et cetera. How you respond determines whether or not I feel respected. In other words, if you actually hear me, I'll feel respected and heard. If you say that'll never work, or we already tried something like that, or what have you. So your response determines whether or not my risk was worth it. And if you respond wrongly, then I will trust you less in the future. And if you respond appropriately with respect, then I will trust you more in the future. And so it's this cycle, right? Trust, risk, respect. You have to trust, have a base level of trust with the team. I take that interpersonal risk, and then how the boss or the team responds with respect or not determines whether or not I feel more trusted and I can take a bigger risk next time, right? So that's kind of what we mean when we say risk. It's not enough to just get the team. You can't just do like trust falls or whatever and get the team to trust everybody. The reason if there's distrust on your team, it's usually because they don't feel that they were respected in the past. In fact, my number one question when I'm working with leaders to kind of gauge the level of psychological safety on the team is I'll ask them, when was the last time someone on your team disagreed with you in front of everyone else?
Ooh, good question. Yeah.
Right. And if it was a couple of weeks ago, then follow-up questions. How did you respond to what have you? For a lot of leaders, it's, I don't know. And if you can't think of one, that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Other part of this that I really loved, and I think is so true, is you talk about how research shows that disrespect, the other side of that respect coin, the disrespect is learned from leaders.
Yeah.
So
respect and disrespect, both. Leaders model the way, right? And we say that as a sort of a platitude of leadership, but it's actually kind of accurate. Christine Porath at Rutgers University is probably the world's most respected researcher on respect and civility in the workplace. And in her surveys, what she says is the majority of people who have been on the receiving end of incivility at work either say it's directly from their boss or from someone in leadership, or because people are mimicking what they see at those higher levels, right? So if as people are coming up with ideas and you're shooting them down and saying, wow, they'll never work right away, guess what your team mimics? They mimic that behavior. If instead you're modeling active listening and asking follow-up questions and exploring that idea, even if you don't end up accepting the idea, you just prove that you heard the idea, guess what behavior people model and people emulate. So this is all a learned behavior. And it's one of the reasons, again, it's not enough to talk about psychological safety just as trust. I can get everybody on a ropes course or take them out in the mountains and whatever and get a temporary feeling of trust. But if it doesn't change how we respond when people take that risk, then all of that trust is going to dissipate over several months as we go forward. And so it's really, and it's not even about the team per se, it's about teaching leaders to respond in that respectful manner so that it will get reciprocated.
Yeah. So if it's not ropes courses or trust falls, what's a great way of building respect? What would be your
Yeah. So if you're thinking about this and you're like, okay, well, that's a lot of pressure. I don't know if I'm actually acting respectfully, et cetera. One of the things we talk about there is in modeling active listening is a little check that I use. I stole this from Julian Treasure. Julian's an amazing British communications expert. And it's this acronym or acrostic, whichever one of those it is, called RASA, RASA, which stands for receive, appreciate, summarize, ask. And I think of this as like a checklist. When you sense that someone's about to get vulnerable with the team or about to share their idea or their different perspective, et cetera, check yourself for whether or not you're behaving with all of these actions. Receive, appreciate, summarize, ask. Receive, are you actually in it? If you have to take notes, if you have to make perfect eye contact, whatever you have to do to put away distractions and actually focus in on what that person is saying instead of thinking about what you're going to say in response, right? Are you actually receiving? Then appreciate is a really interesting one. This is checking your nonverbals. What are you doing to show that you're actually appreciating someone, right? Those eye contact, those ums and ahs. You know, one of the reasons I think so many people get frustrated with these digital meetings, Zoom calls, et cetera, is that if I have to do this for our whole interview, if I want to make eye contact with you, I have to stare at my camera lens. But David, you're actually over here on my computer screen, right? And so I might be trying to make eye contact with you, and yet you feel like I'm staring at my email, right? So I have to check in. Am I actually appreciating that? And then the other two, summarize and ask before you say anything, before you give your take, et cetera. Can you summarize what you just heard? You might use like a cliche phrase, like what I hear you saying is, but you could even just say like, okay, let me make sure I got everything, right? And you go through what you just heard, which not only shows them that you heard it, but it gives you the check for understanding that you actually understood it. And then before you give your take, the last one, ask, is you should be asking follow-up questions. Tell me more about this thing. You know, you mentioned this. You know, what else? My favorite thing is actually Michael Bungay-Stanier calls it the awe question, which is, and what else? 3-word question, but you'd be amazed how powerful it is, especially as a leader, if you're asking that of your people, because usually there's more to the story than what they want to share the first time. And so just asking a simple question like, and what else? Or tell me more, which isn't technically a question, as a statement, that can get a lot more out of people.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites as well. All right. So the last section is on pro-social purpose. So tell us again, you mentioned it at the very top, but tell us again what pro-social purpose means.
Yeah. So this is a bit of this is me trying to coin a term to cram a bunch of different really great research on meaning and purpose and task crafting and all this sort of stuff together. Functionally, pro-social purpose happens when team members feel they're making a contribution toward work that benefits others. So we have kind of two elements in here, which I call meaning and impact. Meaning being, am I making a contribution? Is what I do actually help the team achieve their objectives? And does what the team do actually help move the ball forward for the organization? You know, one joke I like to make is, right, it's 2023. We've been in this binge and purge cycle of layoffs to meet quarterly reports for like 40 years now. I think we started in the 80s. So it's amazing to me because a lot of people still feel like their job doesn't matter, but if your job didn't matter, we would have outsourced it 4 decades ago, right?
Yeah.
So clearly your job matters. The disconnect is people aren't telling you why. Right? There's a reason we as an organization are having you in that job, but we're not doing a good enough job talking about how your work contributes to that. So that's meaningful contribution. And then the second part is towards work that benefits others, which taps into a lot of great research on what's called pro-social motivation. That's where I got the pro-social from. Not only is this an individual driver of engagement and performance, people feel more motivated when they feel like their work is helping. We actually see an increase, to get really nerdy here, we see an increase in what's called organizational citizenship behaviors, which is a fancy org psychology term for helping behaviors. What I like to say is we see an increase in people putting we over me in their day-to-day work and focusing on the needs of the team more than their own individual ones. If people are hearing on a regular basis how the work the team is doing or how the work they're doing individually helps other people. When you let people know their work protects or promotes the well-being of others, they're much more likely to be helpful to even their whole team in that moment. And so not only do you see an increase in motivation, you see an increase in teamwork behaviors as well.
I love. There's a great example in the book that you tell about the call center. They're fundraising
Yeah.
money,
Yeah.
and they increase that by having the students come in. Talk about that.
Yeah. So this comes from a study from Adam Grant's probably almost 2 decades ago now. It was conducted when he was a PhD student, when nobody knew who he was, which is funny because now he's
Yeah.
like the mega professor, right?
Right.
But it was done at a call center at a university. He never mentions the name of the university in the paper, but if you look at where he did his PhD, it rhymes with Michigan. Uh, and and the idea here, if you've gone to a big state school, you probably got one of these calls, right? So I went to the University of Oklahoma, Boomer Sooner, and I get calls once a quarter or so from some undergrad student asking me to donate to some program, right?
Sure.
And it's funny too because they're always, I'm sure you get these too. I know you went to the other university in Oklahoma. Uh, just throwing a little shade there. Sorry. They usually start with big requests and then they go down and down and down. And every time you say no, it's like a smaller,
Right.
it's like
Right.
green eggs and ham, the fundraising edition, right? And so if you think about it, that's a really demotivating job, right? It's kids doing this job on work study because they couldn't get the job they wanted to do. The turnover rates are basically every semester, right? So the entire staff quits every semester. You have to train up a new staff and what have you, because it's a boring, fundamentally and demotivating job. Adam actually tells this really funny anecdote that when he was doing the study, one student had brought a little plaque and put it on their desk, and it said, "Doing a good job here is like wetting your pants in a dark suit. You get a warm feeling, but no one else notices," right? Which is disgusting, but also kind of, yeah, okay, that simulates it, right?
Yeah.
And so what Adam decided to do was to test the level of whether or not they could increase motivation and engagement and performance on the team by scratching this pro-social itch, if you will. So you randomize students into these different teams. One group gets their normal break during a shift, goes into the break room. Another group goes into a different room and gets to meet Will. And Will is a student at the University of Michigan who received scholarship funds that made it possible for him to go to the university, funds that were raised in that call center. And this isn't a long meeting. This is a 5-minute meeting where they just get to meet him, ask him a few questions. What is he studying? Get a chance for him to say thank you, right? And then they go back to their normal work. Now, notice what I didn't say. There's no additional job training in here. I feel bad saying this since this is my job. They didn't hire a motivational speaker, right? They didn't have the president of the university come in and regurgitate the university's mission statement and tell them how important the job was. They just got to meet a single person who had been impacted by the work, probably that they didn't even do, but the work that other people working in the call center did. And afterwards, when you look at it, the students who got to meet Will, they made twice as many calls per hour. They spent twice as much time on every phone call, and they raised 4 times the amount as they had met before Will. The students who just got the break, they performed basically the same. So this is, I mean, there are very few effects in motivational research that are as significant as this one. And it's one of the reasons I sort of honed in on this idea, because we still have, despite knowing for the last 20 something years, thanks to Gallup, how important employee engagement is, we haven't really moved the needle at all, right? In the US, we're still hovering at 30%. In the world, we're hovering at 20%. And I think this is kind of one of those reasons is if you're in a large organization, there are very few chances you get to meet the direct beneficiary of your work. But if you could, we could see huge increases in motivation, engagement, and even in teamwork behaviors.
Yeah, I love it. So pro-social purpose is made up of meaning and impact. So in the meaning section, I think you make a great point. And I've used this term a lot, caste system. People say it different. Some say caste system, some say caste system. But the idea that there's one group of people whose work matters and there's another group of people whose work doesn't matter. Talk about that, because I think
I hate this. I hate this. I mean, there's so many things. I'm sure you're the same way. If I could wave a magic wand and like ban certain language from like, I hate when bosses say I have so and so people working for me. They don't work for you, right? But this is another one. I hate the terms like support staff or back office, right? Because it makes it seem like there are certain people who do the work that we're known for as an organization, and then other people whose jobs are just to support the work or what have you. But if you really, I mean, if you think about it for more than 15 seconds, which most people unfortunately don't do, no one who's in the front of house can do that work well without back of house. But even just using that terminology sort of makes it sound like certain people's contributions are worth more than others. I already joked about it, right? That like, if we would have outsourced your job, there are ways to get support, but we decided that having you here contributing to the overall mission of the organization was the best way to get that job done. So your work matters. We don't talk about it often enough.
Yeah. And so I love the line you had in that contribution is the core of meaningful work.
Yeah.
And then you tell the stories that I think really illustrates that about Lego Bionicles. And people may not know what Lego Bionicles are, but I think that story is really great.
Yeah. So, and these might have been discontinued, actually. It's really funny. I feel like they don't make, because I tried to go find one when I was doing the research for this book, but this is a study from Dan Ariely.
My kids used to play the Bionicles. So I
right. Like it was like a short window of like 2008 to 2016. We had these things, and it was essentially like Lego Technic made little robot figurines and what have you. And so what Dan Ariely did and his collaborators, what they did was they essentially put everybody into one of two conditions and paid them to make Lego figurines, make Lego Bionicles. And it was something that started at like $2 a figurine, right? And everyone, here's what I think is interesting. Everyone, regardless of condition, was told that we only have a limited number of these, so we will be taking apart what you build when you're done. But hey, you get $2 per figure to play with Legos. I mean, this is like an undergraduate's dream, right? I get beer money in exchange for playing with Legos. And yet, depending on the condition you were in, one group, they took your finished figurine and they just put it under the desk and like put it in a box and said, great, thank you so much. Do you want to build another one? And the deal was you could build another one, but for slightly less money, $1.90 instead of $2, right? And on it would go, right? Every time you bid one, they take it, they put it under the desk, they'd offer you the chance to build another one. On average, in that condition that I just described, I'm struggling with the exact number, but I think it was close to 10 or 11 figures that people bought before they were like, you know what? No, it's not worth it, right? And so if you think about it too, 11 is like going down from $2 down to just under $1. So they're like, $1 for now. I've been here long enough. I got plenty of money. Thank you.
Yeah.
The other group, the only thing they changed in what I described is that instead of taking the figurine and putting it under the desk, they disassembled the figurine in front of the person. In other words, thanks for building that. Here's $2. Now, as you're building the next one, you're going to watch me take apart your work. Right?
Yeah. And they're not telling them what they're doing. They're just doing it. They're just taking apart
they're just, exactly. And so in both groups, you're not seeing, like, it's not like you get to go see your Lego Bionicle in a children's hospital played with by, it's like, there's not some big meaningful thing here. Yeah. It's just in one, you get a reminder that your work didn't actually matter. And in the other, you don't, just that little reminder. And so I think about this two ways. One, obviously, if a reminder that your work doesn't matter is that impactful, then a reminder that your work does matter is equally impactful in the positive. But the other is how many people, I mean, if you've worked in a knowledge work job for more than a couple years, you've probably had one of those instances where you spent weeks and worked 50-hour weeks to try and get this perfect like pitch deck right for this client or what have you. And then they're like, oh yeah, no, actually we changed it in the third quarter and we don't need that. Thanks. And boom, you're like, well, okay, so what did I just do there? Right. So we have
all the time.
Right.
All the time. Yeah.
And so what I think about is like, you can't avoid those, right? I guess unless you're the CEO, but as a manager, like, what if you in those moments were like, hey, you know what? We changed the strategy and we're not going to go this way. But I just want to say how much I appreciated your work on this. And I loved this and this. And, this part here, we're probably going to use that in the future, even if we're not going through on this project. What we learned from this is, right? I actually talk about this in the psychological safety chapter, but there's a couple pharmaceutical and bio research companies that do these sort of failure wakes when this happens. So we're studying a compound and we've decided there's no viable product here. So we're going to they still come together on a regular basis to mourn the loss of the project and talk about, I learned this while working on this project, and I'll still use that on these other projects. So we show how even that work that turned out to not make an impact made an impact in ways you might not see, right? Those reminders are powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. You gave a couple great examples there on how to improve meaning. Any other great tips on how to increase meaning?
My favorite tool here is it's almost a joke thought experiment I like to do with teams because everybody laughs when I say this, but it's what I call the "It's a Wonderful Life" test.
I
Right?
like this one.
So you remember the movie "It's a Wonderful Life," right? George Bailey is gonna go commit suicide. I know, a little morbid, but that's probably why it wasn't actually a classic Christmas movie until it was in the public domain and it was free to show around Christmas time.
Yeah.
And then an angel named Clarence shows up. Clarence, by the way, worst name for an angel ever.
Yeah. Right.
Right? Michael, Gabriel, Clarence. Terrible name. But anyway, Clarence shows him a world that would be if George never existed. Here's the bad things that would happen in the world, mostly bad, if you had never existed. And of course, we know the end of the story. Clarence, I want to live again, right? And so he comes back to reality, decides not to commit suicide, runs home, goes back to make an impact. Okay, a little morbid, I get it. But what I like to ask a lot of people, especially if they've been labeled support staff or back office or what have you, is if you just didn't exist one day, if your job was just removed suddenly, or let's say I try and get not morbid. So I like to use this one. I say, let's say you were on vacation in Europe and then a volcano in Iceland meant that you couldn't go back to work for 3 weeks because you couldn't get a flight. What happens? Yeah. Right? Who is affected? And often the impact of your absence is the key to figuring out the impact you're making on a regular day by your presence, right? So it's just a great thought experiment, especially if you're not, I mean, if you're in a customer facing role, a lot of times this isn't a struggle for you. Having a positive experience with a customer, though, that might be something we need to do deliberately, because if you're in a customer service role, it's probably a 1 to 100 ratio. But if you're in one of those support roles, it's probably been years since you've seen how your work impacted somebody else. And so that little thought experiment can be a great way to think through it.
Yeah. And that goes to the last part of pro-social purpose is meaning and impact. And an impact, I know I'm getting you to tell you a lot of stories here, but you talk about the Savannah bananas, and that probably my favorite story in the whole book.
Yeah, no, I love the bananas. Got my bananas hat behind you and my VIP tickets to it. Jesse Cole. I met Jesse. We were both attending a conference in, I don't know, 2018, 2019. And I asked him what he did and why he was dressed in all yellow. And he told me, and I was just in disbelief, right? So this, if you don't know, I mean, it's funny. There's an opening line in the book that is the Savannah Bananas are the most famous baseball team you've never heard of. But I feel like ever since the book came out, they've also had this run of success. They were featured on ESPN and all this sort of stuff. But if you don't know, the Savannah Bananas started as a college summer league baseball team. So that's not even minor leagues. You have minor league, right? AAA, AA, single A, rookie league. And then way down underneath that, you have college summer leagues like the Coastal Plain League, which is what they played in. This is a league and a team staffed entirely with college players on summer break. You're not even allowed to pay them, right? You can pay room and board and what have you, but you weren't allowed to pay them. But they decided, Jesse was committed to this idea that baseball was dying, and baseball was dying because the sport didn't respect fans anymore. Right? It makes sense, right? You go to if you go to a Major League Baseball game, it's like $75 to get a ticket to it. And so if you want to bring your whole family, you're out a few $100s, and that's before you park. And then you get in, and you're like, your kid wants a hot dog and it's $12 and it's hot. Right. So you want a beer and it's $15 and what have you. Yeah. And they're like, there's too much and then the players don't even like sign autographs because they want to get paid to do that half the time. Right now, I mean, not everybody, but it's a different experience when you go to Savannah Bananas game. So first of all, your ticket covers everything, including parking, including all food except non-alcoholic beverages. Let's just remove the friction because we're focused on the fans. The first thing that happens when you walk in after you park your car is you're greeted by the actual players. There's a parade that like opens up the show. There's you walk down this hall of players, all of whom are giving you high fives and saying, thanks for coming out tonight, right? Thank you for coming out because we don't get to play without you, etc. Then they do all the normal stuff that makes like the TikTok videos and Instagram reels, the normal kind of crazy stuff they do to make it a show, to feel like a circus or what have you. But then when it ends with autograph signings. Every time, if you play for a competitive team, you're still requested to be there to sign autographs and what have you. It's completely fans first. In fact, the name of the company that owns the team is Fans First Entertainment. And it's one of the reasons they've sold out. I think now we're actually at more than 200 games in a row. They're the only organization I've ever heard of that not only has a waiting list for tickets, they have a waiting list for jobs. Like if you want to work at their stadium, there's 1,000-person waiting list before you might get a call that we have an opening, right? because not only are they so committed to those fans, they then are committed to sharing those stories of exceptional fan service, not only to the staff that are working in the stadium, what have you, but to the players. And in fact, when I tell the story in the book, when they were going for what ended up being their last championship in the Coastal Plain League, because they decided to take their show on the road, hire and actually pay the players and go do exhibition games, kind of like the Harlem Globetrotters. But when they won their last championship in the Coastal Plain League, they didn't even, to sort of rally the players up on the final night of the championship, they didn't even like give a big speech or whatever. Jesse had actually reached out to a bunch of fans and just asked them to record like a 30 to 60-second video of what you mean. And when it came time to get everybody motivated to go win, he just pushed play on this video. And they watched like a 6-minute video of all of these different fans saying how much the team meant to them. Yeah. And not only did they win the championship, right, but people actually started doing the numbers. Players actually outperformed how they played in college, right? So remember, this originally was a college summer league team. Right. So you could look at what was your on base percentages and your runs batted in percentages, et cetera, in June when you were playing for the college, and then in July
when it mattered,
right? When it mattered,
when it mattered in
when
college,
there were scouts, when you got a scholarship, what have you. And people actually play better for the benefit. That doesn't happen, by the way, for any other team in college summer league. They almost consistently play worse because it doesn't quote unquote matter. But if you play for the Savannah Bananas, the fans matter, not your own career, and you end up playing better as a result. And by the way, that's true. That's a great example, but that's true in every study that we've talked about today. That's true in every study I could quote around pro-social motivation. At the end of the day, people want to do work that matters. And they want to work for leaders who tell them they matter. And so that's what pro-social purpose is about, saying you matter because you're making a contribution to our team, and the work that our team does matters because it makes an impact on this person. And if I can point to this person or this group of people on a regular basis, I'll get the team far more motivated and far more collaborative.
So good. I know we're a little bit over time. I want to ask you to make one more point, and that is that pro-social motivation happens most at the team level. Talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, this is an interesting one. Just there's a couple different reasons for this, right? The first is that very few of us work in a vacuum. And so, especially if you're in those support roles and what have you, one of the things we never think about is how interdependent our work is. And so you might be thinking, okay, we want to create a pro-social purpose program, make people feel more motivation, what have you. We'll bring in customers, and that works great. But a lot of the work that people do, they do in the service of other people on the team, right? And so one of the best ways to kind of stimulate that pro-social motivation feeling is by taking it at that team level and getting the team to express gratitude for each other. This is Ron Friedman's research on high-performing teams, shows consistently they say thank you to each other like 73% more than mediocre or low-performing teams, right? And those moments of gratitude stimulate that sense of pro-social purpose, right? So that's, I think, one of the big reasons for it is the work that we do happens on a team level. The other reason is just anecdotal. I don't have data for this one, but it's that idea that we all have bad days. And when we do, the team can help you feel that better, right? When you feel like your work totally doesn't matter or what have you, if you have another team member that can sense that through empathy, like we were talking about earlier, and kind of give you those reminders, you can keep those motivation levels high far better than if you're thinking about it at an individual level.
That's so good. You gave a couple quick examples in it. Do you have a final favorite how-to on increasing impact?
Yeah, well, so since we're talking about thank yous, I'll just say this. I think most people, I don't want to say thank yous wrong, but express gratitude in an insufficient way when it comes to pro-social motivation. It's great to tell somebody, thank you so much for this, right? That's great. And if you're not doing that, at least start there. But it's even more powerful when you can say, thank you so much for this because it allowed me to do that, right? In other words, thank you for working hard in this area. Here's the impact it had on my life, right? And there's a ton of really interesting research on this, that people who hear about that impact directly are more likely to engage in helping behaviors or help future people and what have you. And so I think we need to do that, especially as leaders, is not just thank you so much for working so hard on that spreadsheet to get all those numbers done, because it allowed me to go to the client and close the deal and be sufficiently prepared for all that meeting. And I couldn't have done it without you. Like that's a much better way to express gratitude, is not just thanks, but thanks because it had this impact on me in my life.
The book is Best Team Ever by Dr. David Burkus. Listen, we talked about some stories, some anecdotes, some research, but this book is chock full of it. If you don't read the book, you are missing out on a lot. So be sure to get the book. We talked about some how-tos. He's got like 5 or 6 how-tos at the end of every chapter. So you're going to want to get this to really, really level up your team and your leadership. Dr. Burkus, as we close out, tell people how to get a hold of you. And I know you have a great online course on your website. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the single best place would be davidburkus.com. I'm lucky. I got a really weird last name, Burkus. But if you go there, you can check out more about the book. You can check out the articles and videos we post. We put out a free leadership training every Monday in video, audio, and text. So you can sign up for that. And then, the course is called Build Your Best Team Ever. It is essentially the action steps you were talking about. There's 34 ways you can take action with your team inside of the book. And so the course is just about giving you those in a little bit easier to digest and apply format. We're not going to get burdened down with the research or the stories, but just, hey, try this today. Try this today. Okay, hey, it's week 2. Try this, right? So to just give you kind of that action plan. That's what it's really about.
And of course, Dr. Burkus does keynotes, workshops, training, consulting. He can help with your organization and whatever you need. So be sure to reach out to him and he will do a great job for you. Dr. Burkus, thank you so much. This has been a great talk. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
What a delightful discussion. Dr. David Burkus is so intelligent, smart, friendly, and I know you loved that conversation. Be sure to check out his book, Best Team Ever, and be sure to check him out, contact him if you need a speaker or a coach or someone to lead some workshops in your organization. Dr. Burkus is fantastic. We're going to do a meditation in just a moment. Before we do, I would love to invite you to go out wherever you listen to The Mindful Leader, whether it's on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, any of the other podcasting platforms, or even on YouTube. Go out there and rank and let people know what you thought of this podcast. Rank it up or down, 5 stars, whatever the model is on your platform. But be sure and rank us and leave a comment telling what you enjoyed about the Mindful Leader podcast. That's very helpful for others to learn more about the podcast. You can also visit us at pendulumcoaching.com. That is our website. When you're there, you can look around and see the different things we have to offer. You can also sign up for our weekly email newsletter. People really appreciate that and love that, get a lot out of it. It's just a short weekly email newsletter that comes out on Wednesdays. You can also invite me to come speak at your event or organization. I speak and coach and do workshops on emotional intelligence and mindfulness. Those are the 2 main things that I speak about. Any other topic, I wrap mindfulness and emotional intelligence into those topics. Let's take a moment and prepare ourselves for a meditation, a time of just thinking about what we've heard today. If you are driving, as always, be sure to be careful and safe wherever you are. If you're seated in a chair, just feel free to just put both feet on the ground, get yourself grounded. I like to place my hands in my laps, hands in my lap, yeah. And rest your back against the back of the chair. Just get in a comfortable position for you. If you're in another position, if you're laying down in a recliner, that's totally fine. Just be somewhere comfortable and grounding for you. If you'd like to, we can close our eyes together. I always like to take a few breaths to transition us into this time. Let's just inhale and exhale. And inhale and exhale. And one more time, inhale and exhale. You can continue to just breathe normally. I'd like for us in our time together to reflect on the model that Dr. Burkus shared with us. First, let's consider common understanding, how we understand each other, our teams, those we work with, those we're in relationship with. How do we build common understanding with both clarity and empathy? Are you clear with the people that you are around so they don't have to try to mind read, but they know what you're thinking in a positive way, in a helpful way? And what kind of empathy do you bring for others, particularly those who you may have some conflict with or disagreement with? How do you bring empathy to that situation? Let's just take a few moments and think about clarity and empathy with relation to building common understanding in whatever group you are in relationship with. Now let's reflect on the psychological safety that we bring to the people we interact with. Are they able to trust us as they take risks in sharing and working and behaving in and around us? Do they trust that our responses are safe? Do they know that we have respect for them and their ideas, their thoughts, their actions, even though they may not necessarily align with our own? Do they know that they will be met with respect from us, from me? Think for a moment about the psychological safety that you bring to others who are taking risks, and what kind of trust and respect do you bring to those situations for them? Finally, let's consider our pro-social purpose. As people are trying to make meaning out of the work that they do, the relationships they have, and they want to know that their work is meaningful and impactful for others. How do we help others make meaning and understand the meaning of what it is they do, particularly on our teams and our work groups together? And what do we do to help them understand and recognize the impact that they are having on others? Consider what you are bringing to the group to contribute to that pro-social purpose of meaning and impact. Thank you for this time as we think about this together. Let's transition with a few breaths. Let's inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale. You can open your eyes as you feel ready. I want to thank you so much for this time that you've spent with us on the Mindful Leader podcast today. Be sure to check out Dr. Burkus's book, Best Team Ever, and his other books as well. And be sure to reach out and connect with him. Let him know that you heard about him on the Mindful Leader podcast. And be sure to tell all of your friends about the Mindful Leader podcast and how much you enjoy it and what you're getting out of it. And we will see you next time on The Mindful Leader.